And okay, we are live. Sidhant, all you.
All right. Jai Janendra, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our first webinar of 2018. The topic today is going to be Jainism and Finance, Ethical Investing. This webinar will be the first of our career series webinars here at YJA. If you have any questions, post them in the comments section, and we'll try to answer them as they come, or as many as your questions towards the end as we can. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our famous and awesome finalists for today. So first, Rihanna Shah. Rihanna is the co-founder of GT Capital Labs, an innovation center that runs an investment firm for entrepreneurs in low-income communities in India. Rihanna, do you want to say a few words about yourself as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I run GT Capital Labs, which is based out of South Asia and Southeast Asia, and we do a lot of work around helping low-income entrepreneurs who are at the bottom of the pyramid receive funding and think about business planning and think about sustainable businesses. I also do a lot of impact investment work in the Valley and have done some work with groups in West Virginia to help them think through impact investing as well and think about economic development. And I serve as I'm currently an innovation consultant at a company called Bright Idea, where I work with large companies like airlines and large manufacturing firms to help them figure out how they can be more innovative. And I do all of this from the lens of thinking more sustainably, as well as being more socially responsible in the things we do.
Awesome. Welcome to have you. I think you're going to be a great panelist for this discussion. Next up is Professor Atul Shah. He's a founder of Young Jains and Jain Spirit and the author of Jainism and Ethical Finance. So he's written a book on this topic. And he's also gotten a PhD from London School of Economics, where he's also a research fellow. And anything else you want to add, Professor Shah?
Hi, no, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Perfect. Oh, thank you. Hi, just thanks to the Young Jains of America for organizing this event. I think young people taking an interest in ethical finance is itself a lighthouse of hope for the future. And I am very sad to say that my generation has betrayed young people all over the world. We are going to leave behind even further problems for them for the future, and there is a real need in this area. And I see even here in England, in the UK, the current president of Young Jains, for example, Mihir Shah, is himself involved with social enterprise, a bit like Rihanna's work. And one can see amongst young people, because in a way it's their future, it's their planet, and that they are concerned not being greedy, about not being selfish, and about leaving a better and more sustainable future for all. So it's delight to see and delight to meet you all. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I think we all have those goals. And next up is Pallav Vasa. Pallav is currently working as an interest rate derivative trader at Deutsche Bank. He's a primary market maker in South Africa, trading bonds, swaps, and frauds. Pallav, do you want to say a few words about yourself? You're muted right now.
Yeah. Hello. Hi. So yes, currently I work at Deutsche, and we generally trade all the derivatives products, rates, FX, and provide liquidity to clients so that they can put on large positions in our markets, mainly emerging markets. And so personally, I've done my degree from IIT Bombay as an electrical engineering, and then I worked in Singapore a bit, and then now in London. So I probably am here to provide the financial side of the whole webinar. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Good to have you. And my name is Sidhant Gandhi. I'm the Director of Finance of YJA. I'll be hosting this webinar. And so a little bit about me. I'm a San Francisco Bay Area native, so I grew up here. And I'm currently head of product at a virtual reality and augmented reality startup called Mobac. Previously to that, I was a software engineer at Apple, and I worked on iOS 9 through 11. And before that, I was at USC, the University of Southern California, Phi on Trojans, where I also served on the executive board of the Business Film Festival. And I led a project for a pro bono consulting organization called Lacey. And I also was on an a cappella team over there. Okay, cool. With that, let's get started. So before I dive into the questions, something to keep in mind for all the panelists today. We'll talk a lot about what you guys' beliefs are on certain topics, but I don't want to forget the more important question of why you guys believe those things. So everything, just remember to, I think the more interesting thing is why you believe in certain things. So with that, let's get into the questions. First one, it's about the stock market, and it's for you, Paulo. Do you think the stock market itself is Jain or unjain? Why do you believe that? And if it's somewhere in the middle, can you give us some more clarity?
Well, so markets, right? Markets have been there since the birth of civilization. Since we have barter system, any product that we want is manufactured in one area, and we can't, like, as humans, as an individual, we cannot do everything. So we need somebody else to do something, and we exchange services. So markets has been there, and one of the primary things that drive markets is currency, is money, right? Now, if you talk about Jainism says money itself is not something desirable. The concept of money in itself. So, well, it's pretty much gray there. Like you cannot survive without money. You cannot survive without markets. It's like a society. It's as important as a society. So telling it whether it's Jain or unjain is really, it's not that black and white. How you operate inside that market, how you operate inside that society is what can be said as Jain or unjain. Your principles, your intentions, your motivations can be classified, but the market or the stock market in itself has various components.
Okay, cool. Let's dig a little deeper into that. So you said, inherently you can't really call the market Jain or unjain, but you said people's behaviors kind of show that. So can you kind of give some examples of behaviors that maybe you've seen in particular that you've seen as, very unethical or unjain in this case?
Behavior, yes. Like there can be an intention to inflate price of a particular product so that only a few participants of the market get advantage, and that, which can be unethical, can be seen as stealing, which is not Jain. Apart from that, in a stock market, that's like just one behavioral aspect that we are discussing. There's another aspect which is what kind of companies you invest in. There are something known as sin stocks, right? So maybe just not behavior, but the kind of products you invest in. Like I just read about something very interesting. It's like S&P 500. Now, if you talk about socially responsible investing, which is probably going to come forward, then S&P 500 has like 7 major sin stocks. So whether investing is right, wrong, and it's difficult to say that.
Can you dig a little deeper into the sin stocks? What do you mean by that for people that don't know?
So sin stocks are the stocks or products that you you invest in, which are like addictive, like gambling, alcohol, tobacco. All those industries, the stocks of all those industries are known as sin stocks, like more like luxury products and stuff like that. So so if you invest in those, it's not socially responsible. If you invest in companies with very high carbon emission rates, is not very socially responsible.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Awesome. Thank you. This actually, this actually goes straight into my next question for you, Professor Shah. How do you determine if a company's culture and values are in line with Jain values? Is there a place where we can find this information out?
Well, I think in a way, one of the biggest problems today is that there is no evaluation or measurement of culture and values in the stock market. Actually, my research on the theory of finance has shown that actually the theory itself is acultural and you could say unethical in its own way, because it assumes a certain kind of greed and materialistic society. It celebrates greed and materialism. So fundamentally, I mean, your first question about are markets Jain or not Jain, I think the kinds of markets we're talking about, financial markets, and especially if you talk about equity markets where the price of a share is a present value of future cash flows, is itself, if you like, giving people an opportunity to trade the future. And that raises a number of very serious and profound ethical questions, which very few people are talking about. And also the depth and penetration of financial markets has become a massive curse on society. There's a lot of research which is talking about financialization. In the last 40 years, the world has become more and more financialized. So the size of the finance sector relative to the real economy grown, and finance itself, it doesn't make anything or doesn't grow anything by itself. So when the finance sector becomes bigger, it becomes more powerful, and then it uses that power and leverages that power to actually disrupt the real economy, really make or grow things or build things. And that's where we are today. Issue about markets, and of course I'd love to hear from Rihanna as well, is this idea that markets facilitate a lot of trading and speculation. And just now, gambling as a sin stock, but actually the financial markets are sin markets. If you look at financial trading, and there's a lot of research which shows that in terms of financial activity today is trading. It's not investing. Speculation and gambling. And gambling itself is very addictive. There's a lot of research which shows that addiction. So all these are very negative behaviors, which actually we can see also when there are cultural studies of people working in financial markets. We find drugs, alcohol, parallel trading, alcoholism and drugs. It's almost as if that intoxication is needed for the other type of intoxication. So we desperately need a new, and in a way, the Jains have a very organic theory of finance, a theory which is very timely and relevant for the world. Somebody like Rihanna working with social enterprises in India, what she's trying to do is to help them grow in an organic way, not very quick, not become the Uber or the Netflix of the future, but actually grow in a sustainable way, working slowly with them and organically, and also enable people to enjoy, to share ownership, to create jobs. So that's the kind of economy we need for the future.
Yeah, I actually want to hear from you as well. So working on still the finance sector, which could possibly have all these issues, but working on the side for nonprofits. So what does that feel like? Is it similar or different? What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, so I think to go back to some of the things we were talking about around markets, it's become easier. It's become more easy than ever before to invest in socially responsible stocks or in socially responsible ways in the market. So there is, of course, the idea of sin stocks and staying away from that, but socially responsible investing has been around for quite a bit of time. And it's essentially the idea that investors, and almost every single person is an investor, right? If you have a 401k account, if you have a retirement account, you're an investor in some way. If you have a bank account with Wells Fargo or Chase or PNC, you're an investor in some way. And those large banks are using your money in a way that may not align with your philosophy and your morals. And since the 1700s, actually, I think in the US anyways, that it's been documented that Quakers members were prohibited from investing in the slave trade, for example. And at that time, they moved their money, and there's been a lot of movement around apartheid many years ago, where colleges were forced by their students to take out their money from supporting this movement and putting it into more socially responsible ways. There's been a big shift in fossil fuel movements right now, where folks want colleges and other institutions to move their money from fossil fuels to move them into something that's more socially responsible. So it's really not, so while the financial market in itself is an un-Jain concept, in a more practical manner, there are many ways to still be able to invest your money in a ick-free way, in a way that aligns with your morals. So I think some of the things that I've done around this have been to move my money from these very large banks, like PNC Bank supports fracking and supports mountaintop removal. And so one thing I've done is moved my money from PNC Bank to a smaller community bank. And almost every single person who's listening to this webinar has that sort of power. It's very easy to do that. Another thing to do is to really look at your stocks. So if you have a 401k account through your company and you're invested in a more general stock, think about socially responsible stocks that you might be able to invest in. So there's many different funds. There's a fund from TIAA or from Vanguard that have these socially responsible options. And so it's really the idea of just sort of thinking about not only the life you're leading and the food you're eating, but also thinking critically about where is your money right now, right? What is are you investing in prisons and in tobacco and in other things that are really terrible for the environment and for the world with your money while it's passively making money through that? Or are you actively trying to think about ways in which you can take your money and put it into a place that is much more in alignment with your values?
So let me ask you this, right? So let's say you get a certain rate of return in the traditional financial market, and you get a certain rate of return in the social investment markets. From what I've seen, and I may be completely wrong, I've seen that the traditional financial markets give you better rate of returns. So how do you balance that? Yes, part of me definitely wants to have my money make money, and another part of me wants to do good in the world. So, what is the rate of return that I should be okay with sacrificing, and how do I come about that?
So actually, socially responsible investing offers a very comparable rate of return. Very large companies are entirely invested in socially responsible businesses, right? I think Paula was mentioning earlier that our entire system is based on these short-term gains, how quickly can we make money through these short-term things that are happening. And so in some ways, I would almost argue that it's more sustainable, and in the longer term, you're going to get better returns by investing in these more socially responsible businesses. I run a podcast actually called Venture Vignettes that talks with a lot of folks, or has talks with some folks who are doing impact investment work or who are invested in these areas. And if someone goes and listens to my episode with Morgan Simon, who is a managing director of this large investment fund, or Miriam Rivera, who was the second attorney at Google pre-IPO and then is now running a venture capital fund that does a lot of work with impact investment, although not explicitly with impact investment, but thinking about it, there are ways you can get a similar rate of return, because the way to think about impact investment is not limited to the ability to make less money as much as it's about making the right choice. So it could be investing in companies that are helping make the workplace more diverse, which usually research shows that will allow that company to make more money in the long term, if that makes sense.
Interesting. And Paula, I know you have something to say. And I want to frame
on the topic.
I just want to frame. I know you're going to go on this, but I want to frame a little bit, just to kind of connect with what was said earlier. So I think we presented a lot of points about the stock market and traditional financial market where it maybe have not done as much good for society. Along with what you're thinking about saying now, if you could mention a few of the points, how has the financial markets progressed society, and how have they benefited society?
So one thing I understand myself is that any market is a necessary evil. You like it or dislike it, you need it. The society doesn't function. You need goods and services of people, and the way is only to do it. You need to trade it. The money is involved, and there has to be a price to everything. So when there is a price to everything, there will be a market. Now, what can happen is you can play it unethically and try and get more advantage for yourself, which is wrong. The thing that stock market gives you is the power, the ease with which you can invest in companies, and the ease at which you can distribute your money these days gives you the power, and you can use that power to do a good thing or a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that does not make the market in itself wrong. It's something like society also, like according to Jainism, society in itself is wrong. We all are supposed to leave the society as a true Jains, and be sadhus and sadhis and renounce our life. But are we going to do that? Probably not. I'm not going to do it, and I'm not doing it. So so basically, we are a part of society, and as long as we are a part of society, markets will exist.
So I guess the question for you then is, we have the markets, they exist. There's some stocks that you identified that, you know, we should probably not invest in if we want to be as socially responsible as possible. Can you talk about some index funds that you know, or maybe mutual funds that try to be conscious of where they invest and how they invest?
Yes, so clean energy funds to start with. They are the ones, they are very, very conscious about the carbon emissions, and they go and invest in hydro energy, air, solar energy as well. So that's one area. The other areas where socially responsible, like there are some airlines like Virgin Atlantic. They invest in fuel, which is low carbon emission. They have reduced their carbon emissions by 22%. The companies that they have corporate social responsibilities, they go and serve. They have projects where they go and serve poor nations and supply them food. You can try and invest in all those companies, and stay away from companies like probably something like a meat industry, or a brand like KFC, where we find it unjain.
That's good. Yeah, I think we can all be a little more conscious of where we put our money, regardless of, I think, what markets or what systems that we use. Actually, Rihanna, I want to come back to you. So in your opinion, what are some of the most social responsible companies that you've seen out there that people should maybe be aware of to invest in?
Yeah, so there's companies like, there's different ways to think about socially responsible investing. So there's ways to like look at corporate governance and see if there's equity, for example, right? Like, are there enough diverse folks on their board? Is there an equal number of women and men? So that could be your lens of an area that you're interested in making an impact on. There's of course the lens that we've been talking about of like a product focused lens of like, making sure that you're not investing in products that are like alcohol, tobacco, firearms, fossil fuels, like fighter jets, things like that, that are connected to like the military industrial complex and violence. Then there's a perspective of thinking about social issues, or the CSR perspective that Pallav was talking about, and thinking about ways in which, like, what are the companies that care about leaving a better carbon footprint. It's like Whole Foods is like part of like was a big part of like the conscious capitalism movement, for example. And then also the perspective of the environment. So I think it's not a like blanket statement of what is a socially responsible company or what isn't, because it really depends on what your priorities and your values are. Because you could have a company that is invested in clean energy but is really mistreating its workers, right? So it's like,
that's a really good point. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So like, are you like, which part of it do you care about more? Do you care about the environmental impact of it, or do you care about like treating people fairly and human rights issues that might exist, right? Like there can be companies that have all these amazing missions and are doing great things, but then are using like sweatshops in emerging markets.
Sure.
So it's fairly complicated. Like it's not as easy to say whether a company is ethically responsible or not ethically responsible. And so I would just recommend being cautiously optimistic as you think about your companies and the places you invest in. But depending on your priorities, there are definitely various mutual funds and various index funds. You can just like look up like socially responsible mutual fund and you'll get like a list of 20, because the growing industry, there's billions upon billions of dollars invested in it at this point. So there's a lot more interest in it, and the availability is plentiful.
Very cool. Yeah, and just to go back and
can I?
Yeah, just a minute, Professor Shah. Just want to go and clarify index funds and mutual funds for those that don't know. They're basically bundles of different companies' stocks that you can invest in at once. So when we talk about a socially responsible index fund, there's managers that go and look out for socially responsible companies. They bundle all their stocks into kind of one asset, and they allow people to buy or sell that particular asset. Just a little segue back to that. And Uncle, actually, I'm glad you were about to speak up. I actually had a question for you. So when we talk about ethical, right, ethical and lawfulness are two totally different concepts. They overlap a lot. But, question for you, should the regulatory environment influence like ethical versus legal? And like, how do we understand what is still legal but not ethical? And how should we go about looking at that?
Okay, thank you. To your overall question and what Rihanna was saying earlier, the research that I did about the Jain and finance, so that by and large, traditionally and historically are not used to distant investment, arm's length investment, where you have spare cash and you invest in a company or in an asset far away. Our approach has been that we have run owner managed businesses, and therefore our investment is within our control, in our sight. And the way we have run our owner managers, the way we deal with our customers, our suppliers, our stakeholders, etc., has been quite important to us. And if you look today in the world, generally speaking, in spite of the huge size of the stock market, Jain businesses, even multi-billion-dollar Jain businesses, the stock market. So we prefer to keep that ownership. With that ownership comes responsibility, a tremendous responsibility and accountability. But we prefer to have that responsibility than to go to a stock market where the manager and the owner is separated from one another. Separation creates a distance which makes it difficult for people to have a relationship with suppliers, etc., etc. So I think it's important for the young generation to understand our own history in finance and why it is that we have had not just success in one generation or two generations, but multi-generational success. In fact, you could say that this whole debate around sustainable business, the Jains have a fantastic story to tell, because we actually have businesses, businesses which have sustained themselves over time. So not only do we have a theory, but we also have a lived experience of ethical finance even today. And my book, shows some examples and some case studies. A lot of it is conceptual and theoretical. But coming back to your point about law and regulation, I mean, if you look at the history of law all over the world, its bases have been in Christianity and in religion. But over time, that ethical basis has become distant. And then what has happened, unfortunately, and especially in the West, is that the law profession has become a business, a profession. So probably more extremely so in the US, but even here it is becoming much more like that. So when a profession becomes a business, and we see this with accounting as well, and some of my research covers that. When a profession becomes a business, its priorities change dramatically, and its priorities are not about upholding a sense of ethics and justice and fairness, maximizing profit, effectively then bending the law and the rules objective. And if it means bending the interpretation of the law, exploiting loopholes in the law and gaps in the law, then that is all justified under the name of business and profit. In that sense, I think that my work is posing is quite fundamental to the whole application of business and accounting and finance. It has become devoid of culture. It has become devoid of this sense of relationship, this sense of personality, of character, personal responsibility and accountability, massive global business. So I feel very sad when I go to India, for example, and I see business education in India, an American textbook, including the IIM, and it's very transactional kind of business education. Got a fantastic faith and historical tradition, and people approach business with have traditionally approached business with a sense of culture and values, not with a sense of profit maximization and greed. So if we can even create that kind of educational revolution, accounting and finance and in business all over the world, what we will create is a kind of social entrepreneurs in a much larger scale that Rihanna is talking about. And for that, culture and ethics have to be the center, including economics and finance education.
So I think you bring up some really good points. And I think one of the difficult things is that when you take on one side the greed motivated, let's say economy, and on the other side the culture motivated economy, what we've seen in the past, and I think history, is that the greed motivated economy usually wins out because of stronger forces, because they eventually gather more money. I think like it's always this tension between, yes, we can do it in our village, sure, but once we go out into the greater world, and like you said, once we go out into this long distance globalization and we mix with other societies that maybe not as culturally motivated, then it's really difficult. So what do you think about that? I mean, should we try something different here?
I think in that sense, I mean, America is a particularly extreme example of that kind of ethos and motivation for business, and that's also why I admire all the more the kind of conversation you are having and the work that you are doing, because it's not easy, and it's a bit like the environment and the thought pollution is so strong that it's very difficult to be different and to be ethical in that kind of environment. But I think that we have something, and we haven't yet talked about the personal conscience here and our own inner meditation and a relationship between body and soul. So in some sense, the Jain approach to ethics is not formulaic or rule based, I would say. It's very much about having an active inner dialogue, one's conscience, tuning into one's conscience, and doing things which one feels soulful and comfortable with. And I can see, for example, the examples Rihanna is giving are that kind of thing. So if we can and yes, we are not going to change the world completely ourselves, but within our own minutes, our own means, and our own capacities, if we can try to be ethical, to support our neighbor. About supporting kind of big organizations or big ethical just doing very simple things about supporting our neighbor, a friend, or somebody hurt over there. Even those little things, that's also good enough. And also being modest in our financial ambitions, being very, very modest, not wanting to become rich very quick, very fast, or very rich, but to actually say, hang on a minute, what is it that I need to eat and to live on? Limits can I set on that, those limits, and then do something which is purposeful and meaningful, which actually helps us to grow as a person, helps us to give a sense of mental peace and accomplishment, and fulfills all our relationships and friendships and all of that. So if we can think a bit like that, and feel cultural inheritance, such amazing examples, stories, like Paryushan Festival, helps us to reflect, helps us to make that contact with our conscience, helps us to forgive others, and all of that can really help us to feel peace within. And if we are at peace within, the kinds of actions we take, the decisions we make, peaceful too.
That's a very good point. I think this peace is something we're all trying to desperately achieve in our lives every day. I think a lot of the tension comes from the fact that we do want to do something true to ourselves, but the reality of the day might be that we have a job and we're in a career. So, Pallav, I think I want to ask you this question: when you're looking at your career, when you're in your job day to day, do you think about the Jain values of what you're doing? And if so or if not, like, how do you balance that with moving forward in your career, what you see yourself doing in the future?
Yes. In the one word, like, the answer is yes. Like, personally, I am very, very like, I'm very, very impressed by the Jain philosophy, and generally I end up saying our main Mahamantra, Navkar mantra, almost every day, which is something.
Awesome.
Sometimes because in this industry, let's face it, right? In this world, it's hard. It's not that easy. You are asked to compromise your values, and you are put into the dilemma every day. So what the best you can do is think about it, try foresee it, what decisions and actions you take will lead to certain situations. Try and avoid it, and whenever you are into that situation, you are asked to compromise on your values, make a conscious decision whether it's worth it or not. If it's not, then you compromise, right?
Mhm.
And we all are ambitious, right? And that's something that has driven us. That is something that has brought us to where we are right now. You personally have done quite well in your career. I think Rihanna has done well. Professor also has done really, really well. So ambition is something that drives all of us, and we want to do something big in our life. We want to make an impact. But while doing that, we all face we all face mm, some decisions that can lead to like good and bad at the same time.
Mhm.
Like if you are loyal to two people, for example, right, and you are at a juncture where you have to choose one of them, and it can lead to harm to one at least, and both of them are your friends. Like, I mean, what do you do?
I mean, if you're comfortable talking about it, I'd like to ask you: have you been at that kind of position in your career, where you have to kind of choose between advancing or doing something, and then your Jain values? Can you talk about a moment that has happened?
So, like, I won't talk about myself, but say for example, I'll say something that has happened in this industry in the past. We all know LIBOR scandal in 2008 crisis was a very big event in financial industry. So what I hear the stories is that a lot of people got caught into it. A lot of people who did not mean harm, people like us, uh, who entered the industry with the aim of making money, who did not know the full picture, but because their bosses were involved in that scandal, they were forced to either you play along the game
Mm-hmm.
and you also participate in it, or you get fired.
Right.
So that's a typical dilemma that can come in certain times. Now it's not there. Now we have regulatory authorities looking all over it. We have FCA. We have in US also the focus is on intention. That if your intention is not right, then you can be uh, prosecuted, which is good, which is a good change. But at the same time, it has hurt the industry also to a very large extent. So, I mean, things are changing, and with changing times, you can be put into a different ethical dilemma. Uh, so again, so moving back to the example, back in the days, the ethical dilemma would be straight away like, would you do you want to? And at that point in time, you might not even think that is wrong because everyone is doing it, and you would just think, oh, it's just a LIBOR, it's just a number. It can be 5 base points higher or 10 base points lower. How does it matter? It's making me money, and it's okay. But then when you look at it in the hindsight, oh wow, it was stealing money from like a lot of clients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we end up doing things unknowingly as well.
Right. So
It's
my next
the
question
only
is,
way to yeah, go ahead.
well, my next question talks to that is like, how can we look at careers or, paths in our life to lower the chance that we are put into that kind of position? And so my question is to Rihanna, what kind of careers have you seen out there? What kind of sectors or industries have you seen where we don't have to make these kind of really tough decisions?
I think that is a black and white question. Like, I don't think there are industries where you're not making those trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're working in the nonprofit world, for example, right? It's like, where are the donations coming from for a specific nonprofit? Like, there's no guarantee that those donations are coming. Like, there almost no money at this point is clean money, or really at any point has ever been clean money.
It's a very abysmal thought.
Well,
it's a very good point, actually.
But it's not. But the great point about, or like the great point about that is that because all money is terrible money in some ways, it's really about how you're choosing to invest that money, right? It's really about figuring out like what is the best you can do with these like abysmal conditions that we have. I mean, Jainism, if you look at Jain principles at like their very base, you shouldn't even be alive, right? Like, you're doing harm by breathing. So it's the idea that you can't actually follow Jain principles to a T, but you can live a ethical life while pursuing whatever it is that you're interested in. So if you're interested in finance and that's what makes you happy, you're doing a service to the world by being happy in a certain way. You're doing service to the world by acknowledging the potential shortfalls of being in a certain industry while trying to make sure that other aspects of your life are aligned with a way of life, right? Like Jainism, I don't see Jainism as or at least I consider myself not particularly religious, but I do see Jainism as like a way that I'm leading my life. Like, I'm vegetarian. There are certain things that I just can't change because I grew up Jain in that way, and I hope to continue to live my life in that way. But I think in terms of careers and in thinking about what kind of industries you can go into in which you can sort of maximize the amount of impact that you have, it's really about what you enjoy more than anything else. And it's really about figuring out what is it that makes you happy, what is it that you're good at, and what is it that you can actually utilize in order to not only live a happier life and be more just in your life. So like making sure that you're not being racist, making sure you're calling out your like racist relatives. I mean, we all know that that's happened at one point or another. Making sure that you're speaking up for gender justice, making sure you're speaking up for environmental justice. You're not dirtying the planet. You're not like contributing to giving bribes and creating this toxic environment. So I think it's really more about, no matter what career you choose, there is going to be a certain part of it that is unethical or un-Jain, but it's really about what you do with the rest of it. Like, I work at a company that works with companies that are doing terrible things, but I'd be sure to tell my boss that, hey, would love to not work for company A, B, and C, would love to not be a consultant for these three companies where I don't believe in what they're doing. And so taking that stand, and more than that, even just being conscious that exists. Like, I can bet you most of us don't think twice about where we're putting our money, right? Or what bank we're putting our money in. We'll put our money into any bank. We'll let our accountant, or we let our financial advisor invest our money however they see fit, because they're the expert. And so it's really about sort of being conscious of all of the impacts that you're having and all of the worlds in which you are having an impact, and taking a little more control over where your money goes, and taking a little more control over how you're living your life.
It's a really good.
Just like to add to a few things. It's exactly like what Rihanna said. But just to put it into a different perspective, is that it's something known as minimization, right? We have 5 values to our core, and we cannot make them absolute zero. Like non-violence cannot be absolute zero. Truth. We all have said lies in our life, and we will continue to say lies, right? Non-stealing. Yes, most of us wouldn't have done it, but then when you put things into a bigger picture, when you ask for a higher price to a certain thing that you are selling, just a bicycle, it's probably worth 5 rupees, and you're selling at say 6. It's kind of stealing, it's greed there. But you want to sell it at 6 because then you consider yourself as smart. So,
but also you need to live your life and eat and support your family, right? So it's not
so the idea is minimization, right? Minimization of everything. How as much as you can minimize, the better it is. Sorry, I forgot my point, but I think what Rihanna was saying was pretty much what Jain and Jain philosophy as such is about all the Hindi word or the Gujarati word is like they say bhav, your intention behind doing things. That's the most important thing. If your intention is clean, if you do not intend to harm, or if you don't intend, then you are pretty much in a very, very safe zone. You are like kind of, when I say safe zone, as in you are sticking to the most core principle of Jainism. Yes. As long as you check your intentions, as long as you check your motivations on a day-to-day basis, that you don't intend harm, your motivation is not, you don't get motivated by luxurious life, saying like, some person like Dan Blitzerian who's like, big into gambling and stuff. Those things, if they don't motivate you, if a lot of money does not motivate you, and if you have your motivations in check, if you have intentions in check, you're pretty much there. Like you are on the right path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the things you brought up is this ends justifies the means kind of idea. And Professor Shah, I wanted to talk to you about that. Do you think that, when you're looking at the financial markets, if you're making a lot of money in maybe a not so great way, but then you're donating a lot of that to good causes, is that okay? And what's your kind of Machiavellian perspective on that?
Thank you, Sidhant. All this reminds me of an experiment on Apparigraha that the young Jains in England did in the late 80s in the UK. What we did was we basically said, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you can hear. Yeah, we basically said that, okay, let's get together as a group and let's decide for a week that we have a very limited amount of money and we only have 2 pairs of clothes, so we have no washing machine. We got to come home every evening and wash the clothes and dry them the next day so that we can wear them, etc., etc. And almost you could say live a little bit like a sadhu, but at the same time continue your job, your schooling, whatever you're doing, not stop that. And and keep a diary, a daily diary of the experience of living like that, without compromise, without going up to the mountains or doing diksha or whatever, just living an ordinary life, but as if with few possessions. Another exercise we ask people to do at the same time is to list all the assets, put them into three categories: need, luxury. And just as an exercise, just try to identify how much of their possessions are needs and how much are comforts and how much are luxuries. And it was for me, actually, looking back on my life and career, that exercise point in my life, in the trajectory of my life, because I actually discovered that money is not something that moves me tremendously, that I can live happily with limited amount of wealth, and as a result, I went on a kind of social entrepreneurial journey, which has continued to this day. So I think that it's very important, because we live in a very, I think the Jains in America are super educated, especially the young people. And what we need is much more practical things, much more practical experiences rather than too much analysis about things. Let's just do an experiment. And then individually we decide for ourselves feels like to live simply, what it feels like to live modestly. And then that should help us guide in terms of our career choices. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, great. And actually, so what was the result of those experiments when you did them with that group of people? I'm curious to know.
Yeah. So the result was actually that aparigraha does make sense in London in the 1980s, that we can live a simple life, that we don't need a lot of possessions to be happy. In fact, with minimal possessions, we actually have more time to read, more time to do poetry, more time to reflect, to write, etc., etc. And that actually, in one sense, living simply is tremendously liberating, because if you have a lot of money, then you're spending a lot of time worrying about that money, investing, how the markets go, etc., etc.
Right.
And we have, in throughout our conversation, we haven't talked at all about death, but the Jains have a very sophisticated understanding of death. Finance today sadly lives in denial of death, even though it's a for everyone. And I think much more reflexivity about death could actually help us live a better and more fulfilling life.
Wow. Well, I would love to see that experiment done again today in 2018 with like all our cryptocurrencies and mobile phones and all of that stuff that we didn't have in the 80s. So if you have a chance to maybe put together something like that, I would love to see that repeated and compared to the 80s.
Actually already written up. We launched it at a Jaina convention in Stanford in 91.
Okay.
I will see if I can PDF it and send it to you. Yeah?
That would be great. I think that would be really awesome for us to even post up for everyone to see.
But my suggestion to the YJA more generally, and you've got a convention coming up, is to try to do a little bit more practical stuff, even when you get together. So not too much cerebral, analytical, intellectual stuff, because in some sense that kind of conversation has no end, But if you can do something which is practical, some meditation, some walking. And of course, food. I know you'll be careful on the food side, but that way people get a flavor of what it feels like, and maybe also try to open up a dialogue for each person with their conscience, and them to discover their soul through an experiment or through a guided meditation. And just because part of the problem with the pollution of today's world, our body and our soul have become so separate that we've completely lost the capacity to have that dialogue, to listen to our own consciousness, And if we can open that dialogue, then it can be a tremendous guru for all of us for the rest of our lives.
Awesome. So when you talk about kind of these practical things, you talked about one thing, segmenting the possessions that we have into these three categories. I want to actually ask Rihanna and Pallav, do you guys have any things that you guys have done in the past like that? Any experiments, or if you have any ideas for things that people can do in their lives today? Rihanna, you can take it first.
I'm not sure if I've done experiments, but I think as a young professional who's changed cities every 2 years, automatically the life I lead leads to fewer possessions, so we don't have to move as many possessions.
Very good point.
But I think there's like some amount of like minimalism around the types of possessions you have. It's just easier to have fewer things, and we're at a point where we don't need to, like, I remember my like grandma, my family would like store like grains for the entire year, right? Like we don't need to do that anymore because it's easier to like, just the supply chain is different. And so thinking about things in that way, like what are the things you actually need versus what are the things that are just sort of cluttering up your lives. But I haven't really done specific experiments around that.
Okay.
For me, I probably have not done experimentation of other people, but I've done a lot of experimentation on myself.
Okay.
And I guess we all do to an extent. So, I mean, minimalization or like not like taking care of small things. Like if you have a few pair of clothes, then sticking to them, not going very greedy. And does it make you more happier? What kind of emotions that is excite within you? That is kind of an experiment I try to do with myself, and I see that when I stick to very few things, when I on my possessions, I just say, okay, these are the things I like and these are the things that I have. Peace. I'm not thinking every day about, okay, I can buy this. That's my time in probably reading news articles, in doing other stuff and other activities. But when like I can do everything, around on hundreds of things and achieving nothing. In of like a Jain philosophy, if you start buying lands, and what you can do probably, then you can divert your energy into areas which is probably can lead to more happiness for you.
Hey, Pallav, I think we're losing your connection a little bit. So I'm gonna pass on the question. But if we come back to you, I want you to kind of like reiterate what you had just mentioned. My next kind of question was, what do you guys think about the general, I guess what you could call it, the sharing economy that we have now, where you don't need a car, you can Uber, you don't need an apartment, you can Airbnb, you don't need a TV because you can rent that for, $3 a month or whatever on some app. Do you think that's actually helped us live more Jain lives, or is that, just adding more, burden on our thinking process? And Professor Shah, I'll pass that to you for now. By the way, you're muted, so just hit the mute icon. Professor Shah, I think your voice is muted. Can you see if you can turn off the mute?
Yeah, I'm trying to just.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So yeah, so your question was about Uber and whether it's made our life easier and more easier to be Jain. Yes, I'm sure it does. Well, there are to some extent, yes, but there are also very large other questions. For example, the share price of Uber and people capitalizing from that, and also the fact how Uber treats the taxi drivers, and that, so those consequences are also there. But I think, generally speaking, I think we have lost a sense of scale in life. Organically, if we look at Jain history, I mean, if you look at even today in India, I mean, if you think about it, it's a miracle that in a city like Mumbai or Delhi, you go there and you will see Jain monks walking the streets. I see it all the time. I'm sure you've seen it as well. So here is a kind of city which is deep in finance, and yet you also have in the same city people living almost a zero finance economy. A Jain monk is a zero economy. So I do think that those ideals, if we can keep them in mind, try in our own way to spend some time living those ideals, and at least even not living, remembering those ideals and trying to aspire towards them. I think that it's very difficult. We are living in a very complex, very materialistic world, and we have our limitations. But, like for example, even moving around too much. Rihanna was very honest to say she's moving every 2 years. I personally would feel very uncomfortable with that. I'm a very rooted person. I kind of need to feel a sense of connection with my town and with my community, with my neighbors, with my people, etc. So I don't like moving around too much. And I think traditionally Jains, apart from, of course, the monks and nuns whose very life is nomadic, but then at the same time very simple. So maybe perhaps we could say to young people, let's think about those moving towns for the sake of career, and see if we can actually place ourselves in a place, and then instead of moving, spend more time thinking and reflecting and doing ordinary things.
Okay, very good point. Thank you all for your awesome answers and really good insights. We actually have some questions from our viewers, so we're going to move on to a Q&A type session. The first one is something that I had asked earlier, but I don't think everyone got a chance to speak on it, but it's do the ends justify the means? So can the drive to maximize profits as a business be justified if you do good things with the money that you earn? So Rihanna, I want you to go first. It's kind of a yes or no question, but it's a timeless question as well.
I would say they do, but that doesn't mean the means are irrelevant. So because eventually you want to donate all your money to charity, that doesn't justify you running a like being a gangster that kills many people for a living, right? So just inherently it's very contradictory, and we can't talk about the ends without the means. But there can be some situations where the ends can justify the means, but it's very, very, very qualified.
Okay. Paul, your opinion on it?
Yeah. So I think I have a very similar opinion on that. It's like it's very subjective. It's not black and white, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ends justify means. Okay. The thing is, end goal is one, right? For most of us, happiness. Well, Jainism also says that ultimate happiness is kind of the end goal, but there are like infinite number of means to it, right? So can you? Okay, if I say I'm happy, if I reach my goal, can I say the mean that I used was the right one? Maybe, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
So per se, ends justify means. I would say to a large extent, the answer would be probably no in a lot of cases, but in some cases it could be yes.
Okay, interesting. Professor Shah, anything to add on this question from the audience?
Yeah, my clear answer would be no.
Okay.
The ends do not justify the means. And if you think a bit more larger, the means is your body and your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, if we have that larger understanding of life and death, of the cycle of life, of karma, from the Jain theory point of view, and by actually trying to make a lot of money by cutting some corners and maybe even breaking some laws, we will pay the karmic price in our next life.
Mm-hmm.
Since we cannot escape the repayment of that. So if we have the choice, why not live within our conscience right here, right now, at this very moment? Pallav said about his prayer and meditation and his reflexivity about his life, what Rihanna said about ethical investment, I think they're all expressions of that. Yeah,
Awesome.
my take. But generally speaking, no, ends never justify the means. Yeah.
Okay, I think we had all different flavors of answers from all of you on that one. So the next question is, I think specifically somebody asked, how can we invest in the social sector? As in, how can somebody compare the ROIs of different socially responsible stocks? I know we kind of addressed that, but maybe specifics on maybe things that you guys have specifically invested in?
I think probably you are expecting me to answer that. I think socially responsible stocks. How? I think investing is very easy these days, right? You just open an app, and then you can probably find a stock and just put your money in it. Some pharmaceutical company or some healthcare sector. You do a research on it, and then and put your money. Personally, I haven't invested in stocks, but I've invested in other things, because like in finance in general, you have some kind of limitation to, if you're working for a financial industry, you cannot invest in everything you feel like, because of the regulations these days. So, but how to invest? Read about the company, understand it. Like Rihanna said in the past, that even though a company which looks prima facie very good, and it feels like they want to do the right thing, but their source of funding can be dirty. They can be mistreating their employees. So read about the news, the articles, the controversies around the companies. Find if there have been any fraud. Read about the litigation cases, etc. Understand what's going on, and then probably just hit a button on your app.
Rihanna, Professor Shah?
Sorry, can you remind me the question? Is it ethical investment?
Yeah, the question was specifically, I think somebody in the viewers was wondering, how can they specifically go and invest in the social sector?
So one thing go ahead, Professor Shah.
You go ahead.
So I think what people are asking for is like a specific like fund that you can invest in. So
sure.
I literally just Googled like socially responsible investment fund, and there's a couple of actively managed funds. So there's the Parnassus Endeavor and the Parnassus Midcap. They've been around since 1984. They've been doing socially responsible investing ever since. And this specific fund makes sure that they're investing in companies that aren't involved in alcohol, gambling, tobacco, or are mindful of the environment and their employees, but still often beat the market. Then another one is the TIAA CREF Social Choice Bond Fund. And this is a bond, obviously, and they're also doing pretty well. They've been around since 2012, and a lot of money has already been invested in it. Then if you're looking at index funds, you can look at the Vanguard FTSE Social Index, which also does similar things where it tracks companies that are not invested in like alcohol, tobacco, and pornography, or nuclear power, and other such things, and they invest in that specific thing. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of faith-based funds now. So there's like a Christian-based fund. I think there's a like Muslim fund as well that follows like Sharia law and makes sure that they're not invested in specific companies that may sort of go against that. There was conversation at one point by some pretty large firms in India around whether or not there should be a Jain fund, or like a Jain group of companies that people are investing in and that follow Jain values. But because we're a fairly small community at the end of the day, there's only like 4 million of us across the world, mostly in India. There hasn't really been one, but there might be one that combines Jain, Hindu, and Buddhist philosophy to get folks to invest in that.
I think while we may be a small community, I think there is a lot of money that we all want to invest in stuff. And I think even in India, I think there's a lot of the economy is driven by like Jain-led companies or Jain-led endeavors. So I think that's still a very viable option for somebody to start a fund like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are already a ton of funds that comply with a lot of things that Jains believe in. So I think it might just be a matter of like duplication. But if you want to invest your money in something socially responsible that also makes near market, if not exactly the same exact return on investments as other companies, there's a lot of things out there. And some of the ones that I mentioned are definitely in that list.
Okay.
Thanks,
Great.
Ria. Yeah. Mention to this and say, what about we invest for non-financial return? So a simple example is to give money to a charity that we like and admire, but then and call it an investment, but the return we are expecting is more smiles from children, more happiness from the unemployed mothers, or more a better health for somebody who is ill or sick, and see that as a return. I think the problem with modernity, and again, unfortunately, obviously time is less, but I've spent a lot of time researching this, is there is a real problem with this idea of compound financial return. There is a direct clash between our desire for a compound annual return compared to nature and the planet and the ecosystem, which does not grow in a compound and exponential way. And in fact, so what has happened is we have created that disconnect between natural growth and financial growth. Connect is something which is why we have such growing inequality in the world, why we have such richness and such poverty sitting alongside one another. I think instinctively understood that for such a long time. So, for example, even today, you will find multi-million-dollar or even billion-dollar Jain businesses. But if you talk to, if you meet the owner, sometimes they live very simply. They don't have too many toys. And actually, the success of the business is not just material. They're not just wanting to grow in a material or in a profit-oriented way, and they actually enjoy the smiles of their customers, employees, the relationships that they have built, their ability to give to charities and support. So you do find, and generally, by and large, Jains have operated to scale as well in the past. If you look at our history, so when you go to when you take your business to a stock market, you can actually grow your scale exponentially. But by growing that scale exponentially, you also lose control and sense of accountability. So we have, even when we have created businesses which have that kind of potential, very often we have denied that growth because we say, no, I'd rather control it the way I want, keep it simple, keep it modest, and let it grow and have a good sleep at the end of the day, not have to worry too much about it. I think let's try to think also of non-financial return and actually enjoy non-financial return by getting involved in charities, doing voluntary work like you're doing at YJA. I had a fantastic time with Pashwa when he was in London. Oh, what a gem of a leader you have in your group there, and to see that innocence and to see that desire to learn and to bring that learning to a community and to other young people is itself a symbol of great hope.
I agree. I definitely agree. And I think that's why we think about it, and we all try to participate in these programs, is to reach that. We have a few more questions from the audience. One is about the death tax. What are you guys' thoughts on that? I know we touched upon death a little bit earlier, but should money go directly to children 100%, or is it okay if the state is taking it for benefit of the greater people and greater population. Rihanna, any thoughts on this?
It's a good question. I think the death tax. I think I'm not 100% sure how it's connected to Jainism.
It was a question from our viewers. I think
right.
he's just interested in that.
Yeah, no, totally. I think the estate tax is interesting. I mean, I personally think that it is a good idea to have an estate tax, and disagree with the work that the Trump government is currently doing to reduce the amount of estate taxes that people are paying, because in my mind, at least, it's one way to try to achieve a little bit of like wealth transfer, like bringing wealth from folks who are extremely wealthy to put it back to some central funds that the government can utilize to provide better services. So I think in that way, the estate tax makes a lot of sense, because it's really only a like portion of the estate's value. It's not a massive amount of money, but there are a lot of estates that have a ton of money in it, because the folks who have folks who were part of that estate made a lot of money over their lifetime. So I think in that way, it allows for a little bit more of an equal society, where it allows folks who may not have as large an inheritance to have at least a little bit of equality for folks who do have a massive inheritance. I mean, I still don't think it allows for an actual redistribution of wealth, but I think it's better to have an estate tax than to.
That's an interesting point, and I actually want to put a little spin on this question. Do you guys think the world would be a better place if estate tax was 100%, meaning when you died, there was nothing you could pass on? What do you think that kind of world would look like?
You're the first person to bring the subject of taxation up till now, or whoever your viewer is who raised that question. I think it's a very important question when we're talking about ethics in society. Fantastic global organization called the Tax Justice Network, who I'm associated with. And in fact, Naomi Fowler is actually listening to this podcast right at this moment. There is a real global crisis in terms of taxation. I mean, if you think about us, how we benefit from taxes all over the world, roads, water, electricity, schools, hospitals. These supplies are available because there is a sense of a public service, that there is a common police, crime, law, legislation, all of that comes through our taxes, and we all benefit from it. But unfortunately, what business is doing today is becoming so ultra selfish that it forgets its money and the kinds of different ingredients it relies upon to earn its money, to hire its employees, to make sure people observe the law, that people go to jail, etc., that crime is policed, all of that. I think that tax, in fact, one of the books that they've written is called The Greatest Scientific Invention. And actually, it's a whole book about taxation. Taxation is a great scientific invention because it provides us with a sense of a public service, that we can actually share our resources and provide certain items like energy, like transport, etc., in a public way. I mean, in the UK, we have a public health system, for example, which is celebrated all over the world. And you can see the economics is very clear that if you provide something privately, it costs much, much more than if you provide it publicly. So the Jains taxation. In fact, I have met one of the richest Jains in India, who is also the highest taxpayer in the city of Mumbai.
Wow.
And he is very to pay his taxes, and living very modestly. Every day he goes to the temple to pray. He lives in an apartment rather than a whole huge bungalow and villa of his own, which he can easily afford, etc. And you see that, and so I think we should not be afraid of taxes. In fact, you could argue, coming back to your question about estate taxes, that actually estate taxes are the best way to give freedom to our children, because then they have to use their own abilities and resourcefulness to build a future out of it, rather than draw upon inherited wealth and income and money. Look at it as an opportunity, and look at it as a way of and helping those who are poor and vulnerable to get their benefits and have the opportunities.
Very good point. Yeah, I think when you realize that, at the end of the day, you cannot take anything that you've made in this lifetime to your next one, or even pass them on to your children. That will probably change the way people think about their lives. Pallav, your thoughts on this?
I do agree what you said. Just exactly, I was just thinking that I'm just thinking out of right now what it could mean to the society. What the first impact is. I don't want to put a strong opinion on it, but the first impact that could lead in the child's head, that these days, people, the kids do say, my father is rich, and they do take pride in that, and that leads to certain behavior or taking things for granted. So that behavior can be significantly affected, and that taking things for granted for certain kids, and they will feel responsible that they need to earn their own bread, and that could lead to a better society in a way. So I mean, in general, in a society, we can see a transformation of the young populace with if you remove the inheritance, the pride, like the complete, and everybody starts from the same platform. But it's at the same time, having discussed, this is very theoretical what we are discussing, right? Practically, if you are a rich father of your kids, I'm sure before your death, you're already going to spend a lot of money on their upbringing and etc. So to put everybody on the same ground, it's almost impossible. But in later in future, there will be ways in which the father will invest in their child already before dying. So it's a very theoretical concept, but if implemented properly, it can probably lead to a significant change in the mindsets of our young kids.
Okay, thank
you. On this subject, I have a suggestion for the YJA. I hope that the YJA at the convention actually start a movement of young people telling their parents, I don't want your inheritance. and actually telling the parents that wealth go to good causes like this and this, or I'd rather that and I don't want to be part of an accumulation kind of economy, but I want to be part of a sharing economy. I think that there is a big generational conflict in that also, because there is some of the elder generation have become very American, and they've become very accumulative, and if you think about stock market, they are windfall, what is known as windfall gains. So gains which have been made without any sweat or effort as such. And this idea of risk, even I have big problems with. So when you have the way I interpret Jainism, when we achieve windfall gains, gains should be literally spent as soon as you get them, or at least a significant proportion circulated. So we cannot be rich when with our very own eyes we can see tremendous poverty around us, tremendous hopelessness, homelessness, etc., etc. And I would like the young Jains of America to actually draft that letter from the child to the parent, saying that I don't want your inheritance, or I only need this much to live on. If you want to leave something for me, but the rest of it, I'd like you to spend it for good causes, and to alleviate the pain now in the world. Yeah.
I can't guarantee any success with that, but I think that's a really good thought and proposition.
Yeah.
Pallav, I think you were going to say something.
No, I was saying that. I was thinking a bit more, and I was the thoughts that came to my mind was like, it's like investing. Parents think about their kids as an investment. They invest in their child's future. A rich dad is gonna, or a rich mom is gonna invest much more in their child, right? So inheritance is going to be there. It's even if you put a tax, if you put a number to it, there'll be other ways. They will, like, for example, say if a kid starts, if a child starts their own company, and if the father believes in it, he's going to invest, right? Either he's going to ask for investment from others, like you go to angel investors, VCs, etc., or the father himself can invest.
Right.
So can you stop that? Theoretically, no. But so this concept of inheritance is kind of going to stay, because even, like, say for example, you have a good friend. Will you invest in your friend? Probably you will, if he is if you're a good friend, even though he's not very, very smart. But there is a kind of a friendship bond that drives it. In parent-children relationship, it's the birth and a different kind of bond that drives it. But it's like more like when you're bonded with people, you like to invest in them every day, every time. We invest in people. By doing this webinar as well, I'm investing in our community, and in general, that inheritance concept is so not trivial. So it's fundamentally taxing 100% may work, but it's just not possible to implement it 100%.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your great answers and for your time. Definitely. Thank you to our viewers for taking time out of their really sunny, at least if you're in California, Saturday. And I have a few more points that I have been told I need to make. First, if you have any other questions that you didn't get a chance to get answered, please email education@yja.org, and we'll try to reach out to you. Also, thank you again for everyone for your time. And we have another webinar that's going to be on Jainism and medicine. That's going to be announced soon. So check out our Facebook page. Make sure you subscribe and follow our Facebook page so you get those updates in your horribly polluted newsfeed. But we will get back to you guys when that will be finalized and the date for that. So again, everyone, thank you for your time. And I do want to do a special shout out to Parshva. Parshva is the Director of Education at YJ, and he's the one that put this whole thing together. So if you ever get a chance to email him at educationYJ or just see him, please say thank you to him.
Thank you.
So thank you guys.
Thanks guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Guys, bye.